Good evening. We are now live, June 11th, 2020.
Welcome and good evening to our panelists and the West Orange community members who have joined us tonight for our town hall, addressing our needs for a more racially inclusive township. Thank you to everyone for taking your time from your day to attend this important conversation. I want to acknowledge and thank Town Councilwoman Cindy Matute-Brown and Board of Education Vice President Terry Trigg-Scales for their vision and leadership. Recently, they developed and launched a survey to assess the cultural needs of our community. It was their commitment to addressing the needs of our community that allows us to be joined together virtually tonight. So thank you for all you did to make tonight happen and for all that you do for West Orange. I also want to thank our future leaders, the West Orange Youth Caucus. Your determination, willingness to lead and use your voice to uplift others is truly inspiring and gives people like me, the panelists, and many others hope that the work that you're doing today will make for a better tomorrow here in West Orange. Some of the insights that will be shared this evening are a direct result of the work you all produce to help bring awareness to some of the inequities in our town. Thank you for all that you do. My name is David Jones, and I will serve as your moderator for tonight's panel. My wife, Dr. Stephanie Ladone, and I and our 3 children are proud residents of West Orange. I'm currently on the PTA executive board at my children's school and serve on the West Orange School District's Diversity, Equity, and Access Committee. I also serve as a Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Talent Management at William Paterson University. At this time, I'll briefly introduce our panelists. First, we have with us this evening Mayor Rob Parisi. Rob Parisi and his wife, Sheila, have 2 children, Kelly and Robert. He owns and operates a small insurance agency in town and has been mayor since 2010. Next, let's welcome Chief Abbott, who has served with the West Orange Police Department since July 3rd, 1980. And since January 7th, 1997, he has served as Chief of Police. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Scott Cascon, an ESL and Spanish teacher by training. He has served in various positions of leadership in public schools since 2003. His doctoral dissertation focused on effective engagement of culturally and linguistically diverse families. Our next panelist is Terry Trigg-Scales. She is Vice President of the West Orange Board of Education. She is an educational consultant and former Assistant Superintendent in the Montclair Public Schools. Terry and her family moved to West Orange in 1984. Next, I'd like to welcome to our panel, Cindy Matute-Brown. Cindy is a proud, lifelong New Jersey resident, born and raised in Jersey City by parents who immigrated from Ecuador in the 1960s. Together with her husband, Stephen, they decided to move their blended family to West Orange in 2001 because of its diversity and high quality public education. Her activism against racial and social injustice quickly demonstrated to her that our township lacked a representative voice from our diverse communities, and she decided to run and was elected to the town council in November of 2018, a position she currently holds here in West Orange. At this time, I will ask Vice President of the Board of Education, Trigg-Scales, to introduce her Board of Education colleague who is joining us on the panel, followed by Councilwoman Matute-Brown, who will introduce her colleagues from Town Council. Terry?
Hi, thank you, David, and good evening to everyone who's here tonight. And we're just delighted to be here. And I just wanted to thank David and Councilwoman Matute-Brown for all of the work that they've done. It was a pleasure for me to join them in this venture. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ken Alper. He was elected to the West Orange Board of Education in 2017 and is currently board president. Before running for school board, Ken served on PTA executive boards in several schools within the district. He and his wife are the proud parents of two sons, one who's about to graduate from the high school and the other who's about to finish 8th grade at Roosevelt. Thank you, Councilwoman Matute-Brown.
Thank you, and a great deal of gratitude to you, Vice President Terry, Trigg-Scales, and Dr. Jones. It's a long overdue conversation, and I am happy to have you on board to help facilitate. So thank you for all of your commitment to our township and our residents. I'd like to first introduce our Council President, Michelle Castellino. She is proud to be a lifelong resident and product of the West Orange school system. For 10 years, she had the privilege of serving on our school board, and for the past 4 years, she's had the pleasure of serving our community as councilwoman, and as well as working with the officials, school officials, as the council's liaison to the school boards. She is currently our council president. Next, I'd like to introduce you to my council colleague, Councilman Jerry Gravino. He grew up in Newark and moved to West Orange in 1981. For 39 years, Jerry has been active with the numerous community groups and in school initiatives. Jerry and his wife, Robin Ginsberg, have 2 adult children who both progressed through the West Orange Public Schools. Next is Councilman Joe Kokorviak, who joined the council in 2010 after moving to the town in 2003. Joe participated in the Human Relations Commission's Living in Diverse Communities program in 2014. Joe is also active in the West Orange African Heritage Organization and Men Make a Difference. And last but not least, our Councilwoman Susan McCartney. Councilwoman McCartney and her childhood sweetheart, Joe McCartney, have been married for over 35 years. They have 3 children and 5 beautiful grandchildren. She is the founder and owner of First Mountain Preschool. Councilwoman McCartney joined the town council in 2002 and currently serves as the council liaison to the Chamber of Commerce and the West Orange Planning Board. Thank you and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Cindy and Terry. At this time, we will move into our conversation, a very important and timely conversation that's going to help move our community forward. In the wake of recent national incidents of racial injustice and police brutality, and a long-standing history of racism in our country, this timely conversation aims to address racial inequities right here in West Orange in our own community, to elevate the voices of people often left on the margins and commit to an agenda that is culturally responsive to the needs of our community. Together, we must unify against racism and racial injustice. Dr. Ibram Kendi, a leading scholar of racism and author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, once said, "One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist." Let me repeat. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. As we begin tonight's conversation and discussion, I challenge our panelists to reflect and consider on what side you will align yourself with. When addressing and dismantling racism, there is no in-between. If you have questions to our audience, if you have questions, please submit them to our Zoom chat. You can also submit questions to the Facebook Live feed. We will leave a few minutes for questions from our community, And I will begin with our first question that will go to Mayor Parisi. Mayor, during the Human Relations Commission meeting last week, community members inquired about implicit bias training for elected officials and township employees. This week, you announced a proposed ordinance requiring implicit bias training for elected officials. The ordinance will be shared with the Town Council on June 23rd meeting for approval. If approved, what will be your immediate next steps that you will take to ensure all elected officials, including you, and township leaders and employees complete this training?
Thank you, David. Thanks for everyone joining the panel, and thanks to Councilwoman Matute-Brown for putting this together along with Vice President Trigg-Scales. We appreciate it. So when we had this conversation last week, we realized, quite honestly, that we do have training, but that it's been pretty inadequate. So following that meeting, we looked at what training was currently required of employees, both in the police, fire, as well as non-uniformed, and realized it wasn't very significant. So though there was training and there is training required, we realized that we need to do a lot to beef that up. And what was clear in our review of that was that none of the training that the employees are currently required to participate in applies to elected officials. So in these discussions and in talking with the Youth Caucus as well, we realized that we should include the elected officials in the mandatory training for employees. So we'll pass or introduce that ordinance to include that. But at the same time, we're spending a lot of time right now and plan to over these next couple of weeks to figure out ways not only to develop the training for elected officials in this new ordinance, but also to significantly beef up the training that is currently required of our employees, both in how often they're subjected to it and in developing a much more comprehensive plan for all employees to be required to participate in.
Okay. And how do you think our community can benefit from these individuals getting and receiving this type of training?
Well, one of the things that came out of the conversation I had the other day with the Youth Caucus, and I think it's a great idea and we're actually exploring it, is to develop training not only from how adults might see the world, but how the high school students, teenagers might see the world. So part of the training we're looking to develop is from their perspective, and why I think that's important and why all the training that our employees get is important, but particularly in this subject, is to ensure that every interaction residents have with employees is handled in an appropriate way, and that if something's not handled in an appropriate way, we have the means to address it. But hopefully to create a training program and a system where every interaction every resident has with an employee is handled in an appropriate way. We like to talk in the administration and emphasize the need for customer service, but certainly that also relates to treating people with respect, treating a situation that sometimes can be volatile with respect, and never losing sight of the fact that we are here to serve, and that means serving every resident. So though we've had training as a requirement, these discussions this last week or so has pointed out that it's not significant enough. We're going to beef that up. We want to add some training that has a teenager's, a high school student's perspective as well. But also make sure that the training is comprehensive enough that we are establishing a set of rules and guidelines for which all employees should treat the public.
Thank you, Mayor Parisi. Next, I have a question for our Chief of Police, Abbott. Various community members in the West Orange Youth Caucus have advocated for independent civilian review board. How will you ensure the development of such a board is implemented and is part of the police department and community?
Thank you, Dave. The Attorney General just released the ability for civilian review boards. It took effect April 1st, which, as everybody's aware, coincided with the pandemic. So we haven't had a lot of ability to put that into place, but to echo the mayor's sentiments, I would like to see some young people on it that have a voice. I would like to see communities of color, and I want to see people who are going to challenge us. I don't want or need somebody who's going to patronize us or tell us what a great job we're doing. I think we do a great job and have a lot of confidence in the officers, but we can always do better.
Superintendent Cascone, if you could talk to us. In June of 2019, a Diversity, Equity, and Access Committee was established for the district. Please tell our listeners what action items have been accomplished to date, and what is the committee's plan and timeline to institute implicit bias training for all teachers and staff across the district?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Jones, fellow panelists, Ms. Trigg-Scales and Matute-Brown for organizing this. So prior to my arrival in the district, a diversity committee was formed. When I came on board, one of my first charges, if you will, as I understood that it was that it remained a priority to the board, was to continue that work. We retooled the committee, and doing so, we expanded the membership in the community with significant representation from the community. And we kind of subdivided the committee's work into several subcommittees, basically human resources, training, and curriculum and instruction. And while the work of the committee kind of was derailed just as it was starting to gather steam with the closures, we did enact a number of things. Insofar as human resources and recruiting, we did expand our networking with various local universities, and have begun additional outreach with universities outside of the state of New Jersey to expand the candidate pool to which we have access. And I think that's really the key, is the networking and the building of bridges to other institutions. We did register in a number of career fairs to that end as well, at Keene University, William Paterson, Montclair State University, as well as registering for the AICUNJ career fair at Fairleigh Dickinson University. The previous year, and this was prior to the work of the committee, but perhaps an outgrowth of the same goal, was to do a diversity job fair. A diversity job fair was held last year. There were 212 attendees to that committee. We had a total of 52 hires last year of certificated staff, 10 of which were Black, 10 Hispanic, 4 Asian, 2 multi-race, and 26 white. So it's approximately 50% minority hiring, which represented a step in the right direction, I believe. This year, unfortunately, we're not able to implement our diversity job fair in person, which was extremely unfortunate, but having that lens in our hiring process as we begin to hire for next year remains a focus. Some additional actions which we've taken from an HR standpoint are really to kind of set an overall goal for this particular committee. And it reads: to achieve a truly diverse workforce, we need to create inclusive environments in which different people and different points of view are welcomed and valued. This is something described as moving from simply counting people to making people count. And along that path to true diversity and inclusion, data often points the way. Curriculum, I don't want to spend too much time and take from my fellow panelists too much time. All of the information which I'm referencing is also available on our district website on the homepage under District Committee of Diversity, Equity, and Access. From a professional development and training standpoint, admittedly, up to this year and including this year, we have not had a cohesive strategy as it relates to topics such as these, though we did begin to go down that path this year. From an administrative training standpoint, we had a team of administrators participate in a 6-part equity leadership network through Rutgers Institute for Improving Student Achievement. And that training was turnkeyed to our district administration. We did have full district PD scheduled for May 15th, and unfortunately that was canceled, but that remains a focus and will be a deliberate focus next year of our PD as it relates to implicit bias, as it relates to microaggressions and things of that nature, but also understanding false historical narratives and things of that nature. Just as a final point, and I could speak for an hour just on the work the committee's done, but I want to be mindful of time, the committee did administer a school climate and culture survey to staff, to students, and to parents. The committee was in the process of kind of unpacking that data and starting to identify action steps from that. And that will be the next concrete step of the committee. And I do intend to bring the committee together during the summer to do that work and to help inform our goal setting from the next year. Just a final piece on curriculum and programs, because that obviously is a key piece. And we looked at data on a number of levels and disproportionalities. And as we look at closing the achievement gap, just a couple of the points that we focused on are enhanced cultural competence, outreach to students' families, extended learning opportunities, culturally responsive classrooms that support learning, access to qualified staff, adequate resources and funding. And we looked particularly in our disproportionality study at focus on access and pathways, honors, gifted and talented, advanced placement, Institute of Math and Science, Institute of Humanities, math courses, as well as attendance and student discipline. I can speak to specific numbers later on in the presentation if they were to come up, but that just provides a snapshot of some of the work that this committee has done to date.
Thank you, Dr. Castone. I want to get to the town council, and I appreciate the questions that are coming in from our audience. We will certainly be getting to those in a few minutes. But I want to circle to the town council. Recently, the West Orange Youth Caucus submitted a petition listing a set of demands around police protocol, use of force, and oversight of internal affairs investigations. On Tuesday this week, Mayor Parisi submitted ordinances for town council approval to ban chokeholds, ban tear gas, ban rubber bullets, and require body cameras. What are your thoughts about these demands and proposed ordinances, and what considerations are at play, if any, when deciding to approve these proposed ordinances and demands from the West Orange Youth Caucus petition? And if it is approved, what would be the timeline for these to actually go into effect?
So, David, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Hi, okay, sorry. I absolutely 100% support all of the ordinances that were presented on the petition. I signed it when it came out. I am still supportive. I want to see what type of language is included to make sure that the ordinance reflects with fidelity the demands that were made. So certainly supportive of them. As far as time frame is concerned, I think that is a matter of capacity. So let's say repealing the loitering ordinance that is on the books. I think that's something that can be taken care of right away. Review board obviously would take some time to create around the guidelines that the Attorney General has provided. It will take some time, I think, but certainly am looking forward to getting to work on these items with my council colleagues right away. So I'm 100% in support of it. Again, I want to make sure that the language in the ordinance is parallels the demands in the petition.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other town council representatives have anything in addition to add? New information, insights?
David, this is Jerry Garino. Thank you for inviting tonight. I really enjoy the participation, and it's a good first step to move our community to the perfect community that we are and can even be better. Coming to the ordinances by the Youth Caucus are things I support fully. I think we need to work hard with them, listen to them, and apply those requirements to our department to make sure that situations are not out of control, that other issues never happen, that incidences do not happen, that there's no reason that they should. And I respect their efforts and look forward to working with them. With the Civilian Review Board, I agree with the concept. I like to see the particulars freshened out, you know, the particulars of appointments, the mission, the scope, and the function. But I'm sure, as Councilwoman Matute-Brown said, it will take time, but it's something that needs to be put together and put together correctly. So it basically benefits the entire community. And thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, am I unmuted?
We hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jones, and thank you for hosting this evening, and to Councilwoman Matute-Brown and Board Member Trigg-Scales. Thank you. This is a great forum and so important to be speaking. In regards to the ordinance, we have yet to see them. I believe they're the process is they have to get reviewed by legal. And so we'll have them next week in our packet before our June 23rd meeting. So that is the process. And, you know, look forward to having the conversation and moving forward. I know when this came about, it was very disturbing what happened in Minnesota, and even more disturbing to hear the pain in the voices of our children and parents in the community. And just listening to the list and what they do elsewhere was mind-boggling, because, you know, just a little background. My mother-in-law worked for the police department for 34 years in the Records Bureau. And her husband, my husband's stepfather, was a police officer for 25 years. So I grew up in town, and, you know, I've been privy to different stories per se. And I've never heard of such that kind of level of abuses that you see elsewhere. And so we're proud of that. But nonetheless, we have to ensure the future for the community. So that's part of our job. That's part of our responsibility. And yeah, not an issue to look at and to make sure that the language is right, as Councilwoman said, and to make sure we get this right for our future generations to live here and not have to worry and not have fear in their voices in the township. So I look forward to moving forward.
Just very quickly to reiterate, I think we should be moving ahead with all deliberate speed. Some of these items are probably going to be dealt with a lot quicker than others, but I think we all want to prioritize moving forward and making improvements where areas are needed. We just got to be careful that we get it right the first time.
Okay. Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. I do think that, you know, it's great that all of you are welcoming these ordinances and really thinking about how we can move forward. I know our community wants to see this move forward as quickly as possible. So let's work together so that we're being culturally responsive to our needs, because, you know, these are critical requests that certainly impact the experiences of many folks in our community. I have a question for our colleagues on the Board of Education. On June 3rd, the superintendent issued an equity plan to the West Orange School community. As a member of the Board of Education, how are you prioritizing what is outlined in this plan? And more importantly, how do you see this plan being sustained and assessed over time?
Sure. Thank you. And, you know, thank you for putting this together. I think this is a fantastic forum. You know, on the board, our role is really to put forth policy and to provide the support for what the administration produces. So our role here is really going to be to, you know, unpack this both through what Dr. Cascone has put forth in here, which actually reflects a lot of our existing district goals, and continue to address it both through policies. For instance, you know, we're currently updating all of our policies. Some of them are pretty outdated. You know, so there will be a new equity and access policy, which affects a number of different existing policies that will all be updated when this gets done. And then it's really a matter when, you know, when the administration comes to the board and makes proposals, you know, asking for us to approve funding for various things that are in that plan, whether it be training or, you know, holding the diversity fairs or whatever else needs to be done. You know, the board asks the right questions and makes sure that we're, you know, doing this in a way that's getting the job done deliberately and efficiently.
Thank you. Terry, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just like to say that the board has made a commitment to equity, access, and opportunity. That's one of our goals. For us, what we need to do is to put our words to action. It's very convenient to write a lot of things down, to make promises, but what we've got to do is to make sure that we've got action plans in place, that we know who's responsible for doing what. I think our youth caucus group, I just think they are phenomenal. I really want to rely on them. I want to hear the voices from our students. What we do affects them. I think that we are certainly moving forward with our curriculum. the superintendent, Dr. Cascone, has made a commitment that we're going to move beyond even just what's in the Amistad curriculum, which is very well done, but we can do more. We can do more. And I think that that's something that we really need to do. Again, listening to our students. What do they see as a need? What do they want to learn about that we're not providing to them? And I think that they're going to certainly help us drive any improvements that we make.
Thank you, Terry.
Dr. Jones, might I just add something to that?
Please.
I think additionally, we have a strategic action plan presently. It was an action plan that was started multiple years ago from a previous administration. It kind of was fallow last year, and to some extent, has remained so this year. I think we as a district are in a position where it's an appropriate time for us to kind of pull that thing apart. Identify things in there, action steps and objectives that are worthwhile to continue, as well as new focuses or retooled focuses. And I think it's safe to say that this bucket, if you will, needs to be front and center in that action plan. And I mention that only as your question related to the idea of measuring, right? And so I think that's the way we need to do it, is have it as part of a strategic action plan over multiple years with yearly benchmarks that track our progress according to these various objectives.
Thank you.
And Dr. Cascone, if I can just mention, the action plan comes out of the 5-year strategic plan, which I think we're just about due to revisit and start a new one. So the way that works is a representative from the School Boards Association comes in and facilitates a community meeting that parents, teachers, students, regular community members can all be a part of, and they sort of develop what they think the priorities should be for the board for the next 5 years going forward. The board then sits with that and develops that into actual goals, and the administration produces the action plan. So some of what's in there right now is probably a little bit outdated because it was put together in, I think, the winter of 2014. It was around then, maybe 15, but I think we're about due for that. And then, I wanted to mention when we do district goals, and, Terry had mentioned a lot of these things are in our district goals. The way it works is the district goals become part of the superintendent's evaluation. So that's how we're sort of held responsible for making sure that the goals that the board and the administration collectively put together get acted on.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming in, and there's a theme around community concerns, particularly around use of force. And so I want to turn this next question over to our Chief of Police. According to 2010 U.S. Census, West Orange is 27% Black African-American. Yet, based on local arrest data from 2012 to 2016 that was reported by NJ.com's Force Report, 43% of motor stops are of a Black citizen, and a Black person is 29% more likely to have force used on them than a white person. These percentages are significantly disproportionate and is a growing concern for our West Orange community. As Chief of Police, how do you interpret this data? And further, would you be willing to implement a review audit of your current training practices as it relates to interactions with community members? And if so, how would you accomplish that?
I'd certainly be happy to, and I think that would be a good part of any type of civilian review board that we eventually put into place. The data uses the wrong metric. Residency should never be the barometer to measure against when looking at arrest data. Probably, off the top of my head, most of the people we arrest are from outside of West Orange. They're not our residents. Use of force data can be very misleading as well because a number of things. One is that each officer involved in the arrest must fill out a use of force report. So what looks like 20 instances could be, 5 or 6. Injury is an important matter. Was the person injured? Just placing somebody's arm behind their back to place handcuffs on them forcibly without their acquiescence is actually a use of force and generates a use of force report. It's those things all added up and in tandem that give you the misleading numbers that people are clinging to. I'm always open. We review every use of force incident right up to the command level, and a misappropriation of use of force, it's reviewed by the Essex County prosecutor. I'm pleased to report to you that we haven't had any instances of that.
So you talked a little bit about the involvement with the community and the review board that would ultimately be put in place. Can you speak a little bit more about the review board, when the applications might become available? What would it look like in terms of representation from the community? and really think about what is the needs for this board and what is the process of engaging the community in this board. Can you go a little bit more deeply into what this would look like?
Sure. So the Civilian Review Board or Community Review Board we were just able as of April 1st to begin to implement one if we so desire. It's not mandated by the Attorney General, but it's now allowable where it was never allowed. It does not have what I know a number of citizens are looking for, where the CRB, Civilian Review Board, the CRB has the decision in what level of discipline is implemented. However, the Attorney General guideline judicially has the force of law. I must follow it if I'm going to implement it. Once again, I'm not required to, but if I choose to, which I think would be a good thing for our community to have this, they can review cases after the fact. They cannot impose or change the level of discipline that was implemented. But once again, we haven't had sustained excessive force complaints, by the prosecutor's own admission. We haven't had any. They've reviewed them. Again, I would suggest that this CRB include some of our youth caucus. I was so impressed last Saturday with the young men and women and their passion. I think they should have a voice. I think they should be heard. They're sometimes the most policed segment of our community. And, once again, I want people who are going to question and challenge. I don't want to be patronized or it's just an exercise in futility.
Thanks for your insight on that. I'm sure more questions will come up regarding that particular topic. I want to switch over to the mayor. There's a question from our audience, and at this time I'm going to transition to our audience questions. One of our audience members asked that they understand there's a controversy over the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue on Valley and Kingsley. While they understand the input of the funders who help support this town is needed, can we open up a discussion with the town and sponsors on the removal of the statue, and even propose replacing it with a person that's more admirable figure of our town that the residents could certainly choose from? How do you plan to respond to this and to work to create a more integrated approach to responding to the needs of our community as it relates to the Christopher Columbus statue?
We are completely in favor of the discussion. When the issue came up today, my point was not to defend Columbus or the history and the misrepresentation of the history perhaps that we were all taught in school, but simply to give the people who had involvement in the creation of that particular monument, maybe not Christopher Columbus in general, but had input in why that monument was put there. We did speak to some of them today, and we'll continue to speak to them over the next couple of days. I think they have a chance to be heard too. So I wanted to give them that chance, but we're certainly happy to discuss this. And I do think that we can probably come up with something that's a better representation of our town. So I was not prepared when the issue was brought up today to run down there and rip it down myself. I don't think that's proper behavior either. So we spent the day reaching out to people who were involved in installing that monument and what that represented to the neighborhood and the neighborhood group, and some of the group that's been involved over the years in supporting that monument and maintaining it. So we just want to give them a chance to be heard too, but we're absolutely prepared to have the discussion to come up with something that's a better representation of our town. I didn't think it was appropriate to run down there today and rip it down myself. I didn't think that was proper either. So we'll continue to talk to people over the next couple of days, and we'll figure out the best way to have the discussion to come up with something that's appropriate for the community.
So you are in favor of moving forward with what the community concerns are around the removal of the statue?
Of course. Clearly what Christopher Columbus means today is not what he meant to the community in the 90s or to those of us when we were in school, much before that. So we have to recognize that. We do recognize that, and we want to do the right thing by the community and again, install something there that's going to be representative of what this community is about today. But I don't want to just completely ignore the people who had a hand in bringing that monument to the valley and what it meant to them. So we'll continue to talk to them and talk to the community and have the discussion as a community to come up with what's most appropriate to be representative of the community that we want to live in.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to turn. Does somebody have to say? Okay.
Yes, Dr. Jones, Susan Carney. Thank you. I wanted to follow up on that question. I did see that come up on our chat. And thank everyone. Good evening, everyone. After the peaceful protest on Saturday, yes, I did sign the petition. I did share it with others. I was pleased that more and more people are signing it. I have been texting and sending a few of the youth organizers articles and text messages, and we've been, over the past few days, had very interesting conversations. And I'm pleased that having served on the council for so long, we do have a strong relationship with the Board of Education. Part of the questions that the students were asking me were about glossing over things in the curriculum and how that has to be changed. I've seen in the paper other municipalities adopting other cultural climate changes. That statute in particular, that if I'm pleased that the mayor is being respectful of the genesis of that statute, but looking at the history and the narrative that goes along with it just makes for a better education for everyone to make change. And that had to do with other things that we've read about and seen in our curriculum over the years. And we need a more in-depth education on that.
Thank you. Along those same lines, I want to turn to our superintendent. How do you plan on working to create a more integrated curriculum with full and accurate representation on Black and Brown history in our school system, such as revising the narrative of Christopher Columbus in the textbooks and the curriculum, Black history being extended beyond slavery, and also the incorporation of Latinx and Asian history in the curriculum? How do you plan to go about that so that we can be able to show an accurate representation of our Black and Brown community in the curriculum?
Sure, thank you, Dr. Jones. So I think that one of the deficiencies that has existed has been that our approach to multiracial, multicultural, inclusive social studies teaching has been scattershot. It has not been cohesive. It has not been articulated in a scope and sequence pre-K through 12. We are also guilty of being blindly obedient to the standards which have been thrust down upon us by external governmental agencies. We have been blindly obedient to the narratives which have been presented by the textbooks, which are created and distributed by large corporations. And so it's time to put a more critical eye on the curricular materials that are available, as well as the very standards that the state of New Jersey endorses, and recognize that they're not complete, they're not comprehensive. And so really what that means is it means developing a social studies curriculum that is reflective and representative of our diverse student body and our diverse community. And that work can and will begin this summer with the assembly of various curriculum writing teams, which will be assembled also in collaboration with partners, with collaborators, consultants, if you will, for lack of a better word, and that can assist in kind of helping to identify key questions we'll want to consider and help us in that work. So that happens now. In terms, another piece to this is, and it's kind of a tangent to it, is really our curriculum resources. And so one of the things that we move forward with into next school year, particularly in our ELA, our English Language Arts, and our media centers, was really looking at our collections and putting a critical eye on the extent to which we had equal representation and parity, if you will, in the titles that were there, so that when students of color, go to the library, that they see a substantial representation of protagonists and so forth in the books that are there, as well as in the books that we're reading in our classes for novel study and things of the like. I do also think that though it's not in the course of study for next year. I think having special topics courses, electives on the high school level and middle school levels that delve more deeply into Black history themes and Hispanic history themes and things of that nature are also can be accomplished. So those are some of what I see there that can be done in the short term and will be.
Thank you. I want to continue with you for a second, Superintendent Castone, because there's been some growing concerns within our community around representation of teachers in the classroom, and I think it's important to really dig deeper to some of your comments earlier. West Orange High School serves over 2,000 students. About 46% are African American. Research will tell us that representation of racially diverse faculty and staff in academic environments help facilitate student success, particularly among students of color. Yet our school district's data reveals Black teachers are significantly underrepresented. Most recently, community members have raised concerns about the elimination of a guidance counselor position at West Orange High School held by Michael Du Bois, the only African-American male guidance counselor. How will you address the community's concerns, and what specific recruiting and hiring practices will you commit to that you might be able to expand on from your earlier comment to make sure that there's greater diversity among our teachers? You spoke about the hiring of folks within the school district, but I wasn't sure, or the audience might not have been sure about what that breakdown looks like for teachers. So if you can maybe just speak to this particular community concern and your work that you're going to do to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no questioning, that there is a disparity between, the representation of a Black, Hispanic staff members and those students as represented in the community. Our overall K-12 breakdown is that 37% Black, 32% Hispanic, 19% white, 2 or more races 7%, and Asian is 5%. So clearly the distribution on our staff is not aligned with that, and that's important. That is extremely important to focus on. It's a priority for our community. I can tell you that it was a priority for the Board of Education. Before I got here, it remains so. I think the diversity hiring fair, which was started last year, is an excellent opportunity. I think just by virtue of the number of diverse candidates that we saw in that one recruiting event, 212 candidates, almost all of them were diverse candidates. Coming to that event was huge. I think it's, we have to go beyond simply looking at the candidate pool, putting an ad out and whatever we get, right? Because what we get in that is going to be limited for a variety of reasons. Some of them just practical in terms of the number of people who happen to see the ad and the number of ones that chose to apply. And so I think it's really about outreach. It's about ensuring that we have a presence, and not unlike that which happens with guidance departments and how they're kind of networked and ensconced within the various admissions offices of colleges. We need to do the same thing in terms of not only our local universities, but to some extent, reaching beyond the tri-state area, so that those teacher training schools and departments know exactly who we are, and we have an opportunity to relationship build, not just simply around hiring time, but in general, right? And so I think that's definitely a way we can do that. And so, I think that last year's hiring represented a step in the right direction. It's something that we're going to continue to do. In terms of, speaking specifically to the concern, over, the high school guidance counselor, I think that, one of the downsides of when you're bringing in, so a higher percentage of your new hires are diverse candidates, and what we know about tenure laws and regulations pertaining to, release of staff members due to fiscal concerns, that they're always going to be at higher risk than tenured staff members, and that's inclusive of strong performers. And so it's not necessarily a reflection of strong performance, but this is absolutely a metric on which the board intends to hold me accountable. I understand that the community will hold me accountable as superintendent for this, and I accept that responsibility. I accept that charge fully, and look forward to moving that needle and creating a more diverse professional community here.
Thank you. And I want to turn to the board to see if they had any additional follow-up comments to that particular question.
Sure. I think the board very much understands the importance of role models, especially the importance of Black men, and not just as role models and mentors for our young Black students, but for our white kids as well. I think it's very important for our white students to see Black men and women, but especially Black men, succeeding in roles of authority as teachers, as principals, as coaches. And I think we've made some really good headway in recent years in some of those areas, less so in teaching. We have a lot of work to do there. One of the challenges is, we're a great district to work for, so there's not a lot of openings. I think the hiring process today is very different than it was just a few years ago, and it's certainly extremely different than it was a generation ago. I think we have a much more diverse pool nowadays. We're certainly searching for a much more diverse pool of candidates, and as a result, we're getting more diverse people coming in, but we just don't have people leaving in any sort of in a rush, which makes sense. We're a great school system, so we're committed, and we're definitely working at it as it's one of our primary goals.
Can I add to the comment? Oh, sorry, Terry.
If I might, we have to be much more aggressive, and that's the answer. Dr. Cascone talked about the recruiting. The thing that I've talked about over time is not just recruiting, but retention. It is much easier to hire someone of color than to be able to ensure that they are successful in our school district, and not just in our school district. It's often difficult for candidates of color to come into a school district that is very diverse without some support. We need to make sure that we are mentoring our new hires, Black or white. We need to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. Being new in a district is difficult enough, getting to know the culture, getting to know the what am I trying to say, the pitfalls, getting to know the communication system. So that we need to do a much better job at, and I am assured that Dr. Cascone is going to take those steps to make sure that we're working on not just recruiting, but retaining our candidates and our teachers of color. That's what seems to be the downfall, and we need to apply much more. What gets measured gets done. So we've really got to start taking a look at our numbers. We've really got to start looking at the number of staff members in each building, the number of staff members of color, and making a concerted effort. As I said, we need to be far more aggressive.
Excuse me, Dr. Jones, can I weigh in on this? Being a former 10-year school board member for a second?
Sure, please.
Great. So I agree with the points that Terry just made. Homegrown, mentoring your staff, my years on there, we were able to promote people such as Hayden Moore as our principal of our high school, and Lionel Hush as principal of our middle school, and Leslie Chung and Annette Dade in vice principal roles. So it's very important that you have that kind of mentorship and you continue to do so and give people opportunities to move up. In regard to the hiring per se in general, for years, this goes back many years with trying to go to diversity fairs, going to Black colleges to try to recruit candidates, but also too trying to introduce, I think at one point in time when I was coming off the school board, I'm not sure if you have the program now, but an education program working with Montclair State, and or having our students become teachers, having our students to look to become police officers, and mentoring that way so they could come back to the community in those roles, or to be role models for future generations. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna go to the final question we'll be able to take this evening from our audience as we draw near the end of our town hall. This is for Chief Abbott and the town council members or representatives that may want to answer this as well. Chief, will you please report back to the community on the West Orange Police Department's relationship with Amazon Ring, a partnership that arguably perpetuates the disproportionate police targeting and harassment of Black people?
Chief, you muted yourself.
Was unmuted. I apologize. So there's an agreement that the township entered into with Ring called the Ring Portal. This allows anybody with a Ring doorbell to, if they choose, they do not have to, be part of this network, social network, so that the police can provide information to them through the Ring doorbell. Now, also what it allows anyone who wants to, they can upload any type of video from their personal doorbell on their front door, side door, wherever they put it, to the portal to send to the attention of the police. We haven't had any, I don't believe we've even had as much as an interview since we've engaged in this. So it hasn't produced anything that would be of concern. We haven't arrested anybody. Of the videos that I've seen off of these Ring doorbells, not even necessarily the portal, but just in general, normally they're late at night. They usually have a hood on and a bandana over the face. If they're typically it's when they're breaking the cars, and you can't tell who they are. You can't tell what race they are. You can't tell who they are. It's been pretty useless, to be honest with you. The irony is that many of the people who seem opposed to this volunteer that they have Ring doorbells. So I may be missing something, but I can assure you that we have not engaged in any type of disproportionate interviews or arrests or charges. In fact, we've engaged in none.
Dr. Jones, if I can just add from the council perspective, at least from this independent counsel's perspective.
Yes, please.
We're in this space to have dialogue about how do we move our community forward in being more racially inclusive. Mm-hmm. Those conversations have to focus also on the intentional guide, the intent to make sure that we are not participating in systems that oppress and marginalize people. Ring does that. Ring has a contract with, or is entering a contract with ICE, and they are scanning people of color. There's a failure to recognize between white and Black people. I don't think, if we are serious about working to eradicate racism and racist policies, that this township, if we want to lead, should not participate in any function that might endanger the life of someone simply because they fit the profile. You know, they fit the description. Far too many young Black and brown people do. I don't think that if we want to move forward, we have to intentionally disentangle ourselves from all racist policies. And this is one. It lends itself to one, and I think that it should be removed. Especially if it's of no consequence, it hasn't helped one way or the other. The potential of danger is greater, and it's just part of a system that continues to police Black and brown lives.
Thank you, Councilwoman Matute-Brown. I think that comment there provides context toward this overall topic for this evening, and it really drives home some of the work that needs to be done by members of this panel as we move forward and as we respond to the concerns of our community. And so my final question for the panelists, and just ask that you just be brief in summarizing this particular thought, but you know, accountability is important. We have this conversation. If we don't do anything with the thoughts and ideas shared with this conversation, we are leaving our community at a disadvantage, and that's not what we're here for. And so moving forward, how are you going to hold yourself accountable to actions that respond to the sentiments expressed by our community, particularly at this past Saturday's protest, and through the questions that were asked today? A sentiment centered on engaging in a collaborative effort to address racism, injustice, and inequities here in West Orange. How are you going to hold yourself accountable to the things that you might have said in tonight's conversation? This is
I'll start. I'll start if that's okay. Mm-hmm. And I thank you, Dr. Jones. I think that we've talked, about some of the accountability mechanisms, in terms of goals and strategic action plans. But I think, accountability, comes from deeper within one. as opposed to kind of external expectations, although those are important. And I think they're particularly important externally facing as artifacts to the community that can be demonstrated to show progress. To me, it's something that has always driven me as an educator, but I think I'm gonna double and triple down on this sentiment that exists within my heart, is that to serve every kid like they're my own kid, you know, and to work to ensure that every child in our schools, that I'm working just as hard for them as I would for my own child. And I think that coming back to that, you know, day in and day out, the moment I wake up to the moment I go down, sleep at night, to me is where I'm going to derive the fuel to hold myself accountable, even as I look to others to hold me accountable for it as well.
Thank you. And I want to be able to hear from everyone from the panel, because it's important that our community hears what you all are holding yourself accountable to as we move forward. So please provide brief insights to your accountability next steps.
Dr. Jones, I'll jump in, and I want to start by, just for those of us who attended the protest, there was a big sign that read, "The system got y'all thinking legal means right. Don't forget that slavery was legal." I think that is so profound, because so many of the things that we participate in, simply because they're legal or they're in guide, doesn't mean that we should participate in them. For me, holding myself accountable is coming up with plans, challenging my council and my mayor and our chief to ensure that we're not just talking. So for instance, we talk about a diversity hiring plan, an equity hiring plan, right? For the school board as well, we spoke about it for the police department. However, how do we intend to hire and attract when we cannot compete? We are not competitive in as much as recruiting anyone at this point, because there hasn't been a contract for the police. We're no longer willing to offer retiree health benefits. What is going to make people want to come to work in West Orange? And if we're only offering that to minorities, then what are we intentionally doing about elevating the wealth of the Black community? Because that's also our responsibility. I think we also have to talk about microaggressions. Saying that we'll take implicit bias training isn't enough. What is the intervention? So that's my challenge. What are we doing in this training? What is the follow-up? I'd love to see a racial equity plan that is not just created by us. I want to hear people's voices. I also want to be able to have a membership and for all of us to participate in the National League of Cities in their racial equity and leadership, so that when we create policies, we're doing so through a racial equity lens. That takes some time, I know, but we have to start at some point. And I would say that as far as looking at what our systems are we tracking? Can we create a database that tracks tickets and citations, arrests, code violations? What communities are impacted greater by them? We should be able to have that information at our fingertips. So these are the things that, I mean, obviously don't have all the answers, but these are the things that I am thinking about when I think, how do we move forward from here? And lastly, I will say, these community conversations, I know it's only an hour for today, however, we need to continue to hold them. We need to hold space for our residents' voices to be elevated, for them to be validated. And I have to say this, to no offense with anyone, I'm going to challenge my council colleagues and my administration to look at the HRC ordinance and rework it, because it has not worked for us. I stopped attending meetings in 2016. That voice is absent for us. I have 2 appointees on there, we all do. However, it does not represent, like Marley Diaz said on the steps of Town Hall, we are there for candlelight vigils for every other community. But when violence is impacted against Black communities, this administration and the HRC, who is charged with this, is silent. We have a problem. So that's how I am going to hold myself accountable, by making sure that I not only call it out, but I offer a solution. So let's work at looking at what's not right, and let's rework it and fix it. That's my space and accountability.
Yeah, I want to turn to Joe. You're on mute.
muted.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
We hear you.
I apologize. I'll try to be brief. I think you made a very good point with asking about accountability and looking forward in the future, because I think, and I want to just sort of follow up on what the councilwoman was saying. I think we need at this point to create a long-term infrastructure so that we make sure that residents, this group would be listening to the community, developing the issues that need to be considered and addressed, come up with potential solutions, develop strong relationships with the governing bodies, and also have regular reporting and in public, like at the governing body meetings, have a broad portfolio of a review of the town and school operations, focus on increasing interaction among the demographics in town, and have as a key element maximizing transparency, and that's where you're going to get accountability. So I think we need to start thinking about creating a body. If the HRC isn't the right body, and if it can't be modified, or if we want to create an additional body, I think that has to be on the list of to-dos going forward, so that this gets implemented in long-term in place as an infrastructure and not just a one-off. We've made a really good start with the rally, a really good start with this forum tonight, but I think that's what we need to move forward.
Dr. Jones, Susan McCartney again. Cindy, thank you for your comments. We do need to be accountable. We do need to have the training. Years ago, the HRC did have discussions on race. We had numerous discussions on race, and I believe a few of my council people did attend those sessions. I think that's why West Orange is where it is right now, because so much work did come out of that. People change, people move on, we get new people elected, and we have new appointments. I think that all has to be resurrected. We can look at what that format is. There are people that are still around that did serve on that commission, and they can dig up their notes, but I think that that was a great start. And like I said, I think that has to be resurrected. To see there were Board of Ed members there, town council members, department heads, quite a few people in the community. It was not just an advisory board, it was putting words into action. And I think that that's why West Orange does as well as we do. We have a lot more to go. The chief has been fielding so many, he's been sharing all of the emails and conversations that he's had with the community. And I noticed on one of them, he said, we are not resting on our laurels. And though, we know that the police department has the accreditation standard, gold standard, we know so much progress has been made, which is why I believe we were able to have such a peaceful protest. I think that starts all over again. We just put that back in place, find what was positive and workable from those conversations. And this is only a beginning, and we move on from there. The chief also said before about people on the committee that question and challenge. I certainly agree with that, because we have already been challenged. But I think the next part of that is to educate. People are learning more things that we do have in place, and we need to continue to do that, just like this forum.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other new thoughts or additional accountability measurements?
Yes, I like to speak, Dr. Jones.
Please.
Okay, great. So accountability, it goes by your actions. So just don't say something, do something, follow through. And that is the key, following through. We can have all the plans in the world, all the action plans, but you have to come through with them. Staff development, I always found from my years on the school board and diversity training, we have to invest more of that on the township side. Staff development is important. Communication, we talked about early on in the evening tonight about things we want to change and what we didn't do. And last week when I turned to the chief and I asked him, we don't, do we do X, Y, and Z? And why isn't this up on the website? And he started creating a separate website for the police department. So I know we always fall short with communication, letting people know what we do, what we could do better, and we have to follow through with that because we have to get our policies out there and we need to work on them. Listening, the conversations on race, I was a part of that a few years back, and I agree with Susan. Very productive conversations and there were workshops that you were put in stations. So I'm one for training. I have no problem with the bias training. I'm a certified school board member. It's funny, when you're a school board member, you go for hours and hours each year for training and professional development. And then on the township side, you have to, apply for your own to go to the League of Municipalities, which I have done a few times since I've been on the council, because it's important to go and get that professional development training. And that's how we're all going to become better leaders. Leadership training, listening to your community and following through to your community. And like I said, having empathy. Walking down last week to Washington Avenue and seeing all those kids I've known since they were little kids, growing up with my son, broke my heart. I came home and I was heartbroken that they felt bad. What did I do to fail them all those years on the school board that they still feel this way? I can't tell you how, I'm going to get upset, how that bothered me. That really bothered me, that those kids felt so hurt. And what did I miss? And I tried so hard, starting after school programs and filling voids and making sure we have late buses and having quality program so all our kids could participate, but still we're missing the mark. And that really hurt last week. And I'm committed. We're gonna not have our kids hurt, and we're gonna have these conversations because they're important and they're meaningful. And I've been blessed to have the opportunity recently to work with our senior citizen community to age in place and learning about grants and targeting the whole community and making sure that everyone loves school here and they want to stay here and age here. So we're going to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. Thank you for everybody coming on tonight.
Dr. Jones, may I add? Thank you. And thank you to my colleagues and everybody. But the most important thing, we talk about accountability. Accountability is what you do and not what you say. It's the people that you appoint to boards. It's the people that you're responsible, that you take the initiative to have the people there that really believe in the mission of any board they sit on, whether it's Downtown Alliance, whether it's pedestrian safety, whether it's HRC. It has to be what's best for the township. And it reflects on what you do as an elected official and before you come on to the council. And the things we've done, like anti-bias training, everything should also include all our local, recreation boards, our Mountaintop, our PAL. Everybody needs to be involved because remember, the youth are important and they learn from the adults, and the adults need to be the perfect example. And that's why way back in the days of Mountaintop, to make it very inclusive with our coaches, with our trustees, in developing scholarship programs for people who couldn't afford to participate in our programs. We never turned a child away. But when you talk about accountability, it's what you say, it's what you do. And that's my responsibility. The youth of this township are our responsibility, not just the Board of Education's, but the Township Council, the adults, the senior citizens. We are responsible. You gave us a sacred trust, and it's our responsibility to act on it, not just to sit there, shake our heads, yes and no, vote on things. We have to be accountable. And if we make a mistake, we have to go and fix that mistake. Be true to yourself. If you make a mistake, nobody's perfect. Ask your colleagues, ask the youth, ask the residents of the town, what did I do wrong? How can we fix it? You have to make people inclusive, and that's being accountable. And that's what I've always intended to do, and all the things I've done in the township, and I continue and will always vow to hold my sacred trust that the residents gave to me to be accountable. And that's the important thing. And thank you to Dr. Jones and Councilwoman Matute-Brown and and Cherry Trigg-Scales for the Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm recognizing that we're well over time, and I want to be mindful of our folks out there listening and our panel in terms of other commitments and engagement they may have. So I do want to turn around accountability. I want to turn to the mayor for our last comment. In terms of thinking about the HRC and disassociating it from it being under the mayor and having a more integrated component that is centered on the community. What are your thoughts around the current structure of the HRC and restructuring it in a way that is more fundamental to the values of West Orange and our community members? And talking about that in relationship to your accountability would be great.
You know, David, some of the conversations that I've had over these last couple of days, whether they were young adults or members of the community, in many cases, people I've never spoke to before, I've been a bit embarrassed at a lot of the things I'm hearing because they brought a perspective that maybe I wasn't thinking of before. You know, we get so insular sometimes in doing what we're doing that maybe we don't pay attention to something that's been in place for a long time. The Human Relations Commission, to speak on that, first of all, was established in the early 90s. I think we amended the number of appointments maybe 6 or 7 years ago. But it's not something that we've maybe given a lot of thought to. In fact, to be quite honest with you, and one of the things I hope comes from all these discussions is more community engagement, because one of the really sad points to talk about the HRC as well as many of our committees is most often it's difficult to get appointments. In fact, I'm pretty sure nearly every one of our boards has vacancies, and the HRC has been no different. But if coming from these conversations, there's the idea that we should restructure it, I have no problem with that. The HRC has always been set up in a way that was supposed to be a separate body from the local government to address matters that were important to the community and important to the members of the HRC. If there is somehow now a feeling that because they're mayor appointments, because they're council appointments, then we need to restructure that. That's not something I ever gave much thought to. I'm only hearing now in these last few days that maybe it's not structured the way it should be. So whatever we can do to give boards legitimacy and to give residents a voice, we're in favor of. I hold myself accountable every day, and I can tell you, it's not hard to get in touch with me. Residents hold me accountable every day, and I'm okay with that. I asked for this. My goal today remains the same it was when I first got involved in government a number of years ago, was to make the town better. Now, clearly, sometimes those objectives have changed over the years, but that's our responsibility to change with them. One of the things I've also learned these last couple of days in talking with a number of young adults in town is they do really see the world different. You know, there's a lot of talk all the time about transparency, and with no disrespect to my colleague on the council who says it a lot, sometimes I find it troubling because it's never clearly defined what that means. One of the things that have come out of these conversations these last couple of days with so many different people from the community is they've more clearly defined what they want to see in transparency. So, what's interesting is in many cases, it wouldn't have been things I would have ever thought was important to them. So they've been good conversations because now we know in terms of policing and governing what maybe some members of the community really do want to know. We just view it as normal, the ABCs of governing, but there's a need in the community for them to understand that. So we're going to continue to listen over these next couple of days, weeks, months, and figure out ways that we can make people feel comfortable. Our only objective to be in local government is to make people want to live here. We don't do it for the money. We don't do it for the fame. We do it because we believe in the community. The community has meant something to us. It's meant something to our families. And we want to make sure it means something to the people who choose to live here. That's a big responsibility we take. And I don't think any of us here in local government, I don't think anyone on this panel tonight takes that lightly. So we're going to spend time listening. The ordinances that we're going to introduce so quickly, because they were pretty easy to do. They were no-brainers, as they say. So those can be done fast. We're going to have a little bit more conversation on the Citizens Review Board, because that takes a little bit more discussion to figure out how that would be structured. And some of these other things are going to take a little bit more time. But we're going to focus on making our police department more transparent. We're going to set up a Facebook page for the police where we can release data on a regular basis as we accumulate it, release process, release procedure, release things that they're doing, so people understand more about what's happening in the police department. We're going to make it as transparent as possible, from everything from important community initiatives right down to policy and procedure and how people get hired and when we're even hiring. So admittedly, as I mentioned, I never gave much thought that the community might want to know exactly how the police and fire departments hire, but I've heard that loud and clear these last couple of days, that it is important to understand the process in New Jersey, and we're going to make sure that's available to people. So we have a lot of work to do, and I think that starts with listening. I've enjoyed the conversations I've had these last 4 or 5 days with members of the community that I haven't had a chance to speak to, and more than anything, young people in the community that clearly see the world a little bit different than we do, and it's important that we give not only a voice, but then give them the attention that their viewpoint needs. So I hold myself accountable every day. I've enjoyed being mayor. I've asked for this. Don't do it for the glory. Do it because I believe in the community, and I want people to believe in the community. We don't have to always agree. None of us will always agree, but that doesn't mean we cannot all be singularly focused on making this town the best that we can make it. And that remains my goal every day when I wake up. What can I do today to make the town better? And we're going to spend the next several weeks listening to people to make sure that we continue to focus on that goal.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Jones,
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I did not let the public know that this is Councilwoman Cindy Matute-Brown's vision, this town hall tonight. She asked me to, and asked you as well, to help in the planning, but this was her vision. She's courageous. She has a commitment to this town, and I want to applaud her for her efforts. When we were planning it, we said, should we make it 2 hours long? And we decided, no, let's start small and let's build on it. Let's make sure that our community wants more. And I think it has been extremely evident tonight that our community wants more. We want to hear their voices, and we need to certainly hold ourselves accountable. This is a beginning. This is just a beginning, and I thank again everyone who tuned in tonight and who shared questions and comments, and please keep them coming. Please keep them coming. We can make this a much, much better place. Thank you.
I want to echo your sentiments about Councilwoman Matute-Brown. Her vision, her leadership to bring us to this point has been phenomenal, and I certainly sincerely appreciate her voice and presence in our community. I want to just say, as we're concluding our time together, that I'm reading through the chat, and folks want to see more. Folks want to see more conversations like this from our elected officials. They want to hear from us. They want to hear from you all on a more regular basis. And so I want to challenge us, and I want to challenge you all to think about ways in which we can have spaces and forums and town halls like this more often, that allows you to then share concrete updates and tangible ways that you're moving forward to make West Orange a more racially inclusive environment and community for our residents. And so I hope and I challenge you all to circle back and identify some additional dates in the near future, so that we can continue the conversation for our community, because our community wants to hear from you. Our community wants to be engaged in this change process. The other piece is that, you know, we're in a place where we need to be open to new ideas. We need to be open to making progress and moving forward. And so thinking about the past or reflecting on past stories or past accomplishments is not necessarily going to position us to be the inclusive community that we're striving for. And so I want to make sure that as the moderator, someone that's been reading the chat and staying on top of what people are saying, that I center that and I name that for our residents, because it's important that we move forward with a vision that's open to new ideas. And so I want to thank our panelists for their participation, their engagement, and their thoughtful responses to a lot of the critical issues that are impacting our community. The work starts now. The work truly starts now. It's time to transform this meaningful dialogue into action, where community members see the change, where policies, procedures, laws, representation is reflective of our community. I encourage those listening to continue being the voice that our community so desperately needs. I'll end with a quote from activist Dr. Angela Davis. Dr. Davis says, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept." So let's all continue to change the things we can no longer accept here at West Orange and in our community. Let's support one another. Let's remain hopeful, and let's be joined together in the collective fight for equity and justice. Thank you all for joining tonight's town hall. Let's all stay safe, healthy, and enjoy our summer months. Thank you. And thank you to our panelists.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And good night. Everyone stay safe. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Be safe.
Stay safe.
All right, stay safe.